In the room. Morning, everyone. Zoom is telling me that folks are still queued, waiting to get in.
Yeah, 8, 9, 10.
Our Zoom account rep, I asked, why doesn't it let everybody in just at one go if they're waiting? And his answer was, so the system doesn't crash. Whether or not there is truth to that, or it's just something he said to shut me up, I don't know.
There's 12 right now.
Very good. And it's telling me now that that's everybody who's waiting. So I can say officially, welcome everyone to our 6th of 8 monthly webinars here, hosted by Idaho Commission for Libraries, led by us, Library Strategies Consulting Group. My name is David Katz, and I am the Assistant Director of Programs and Services at Library Strategies, also the project manager attached to that exciting partnership. It's wonderful to see so many familiar names on the Zoom with us, albeit not surprising, since we are, as of today, 3/4 of the way through this webinar curriculum on capital improvements. For that reason, I think I'll try to keep this preamble short. I'm joined today by two of our lead consultants. We have Kathy Alloway, retired director, most recently of the SCLO Center Region Library out of State College, Pennsylvania. For comparison, State College proper has a population of about Rexburg, Idaho, or say Post Falls. And Kathy is joined by Melissa Prashant, who, among other duties, is currently interim director of the Central Minnesota Libraries Exchange out of Cambridge, Minnesota, which size-wise is kind of on par in the league of, say, Burley or Payette, though CMLE covers a service area that is wider. Before I pass the reins to Melissa and Kathy to lead this jam-packed hour on moving and reopening considerations, I would say a hearty thank you to those who submitted questions ahead of time. I'll be your proxy or mouthpiece. And towards the end of our time together, kick off the audience Q&A with those. As other questions occur to you, hope they do, please slip them into the Zoom chat at any time. I'll be on the lookout for those, but interject only if it's something best addressed in the moment, otherwise expect questions at the end. All right, you two could, thank you, orient us with where today's content fits into the larger curriculum and take it away.
Welcome, everyone. Melissa and I are so glad to be here. Hope you enjoy this learning experience. Between the two of us, we've had a lot of construction experience. Mine ranges from opening a multi-million-dollar facility in Hershey, Pennsylvania, to doing more modest repairs and also repairing damage done by frozen pipes and flooding. And Melissa, a little bit more about what you know.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Melissa Prashant. I'm a senior consultant with Library Strategies. I was figuring as we were preparing for this talk and thinking about it, that I've moved 10 libraries in my professional career. The last one being a Genealogical Society library here in the Twin Cities. And so I'm glad to be sharing with you some of what we've learned. Both Catherine and I will be talking about what we've learned. There's no, obviously, one way to do it. It's a big field, and we'll be going through a lot of the options. I'm going to talk to you about the agenda. We're going to be talking about preparation and planning, weeding, and mapping those collections. Movers, do you hire movers or do you do it yourself? How do you stage the site? Do you close? Do you keep it open? How long do you close for? Opening the doors again, and then expressing gratitude for what's happened over a length of time. Okay?
And we do want to say that we know that many of you watching, there's a huge variety in the size and the scale of your projects. You could just be replacing a front door, or you could be moving to a whole new building. But we think there's going to be something of value to everybody in this. But we are keeping in mind, and we'll keep saying, that we're aware that many of you have different kinds of projects, and not everything we say fits exactly, but it's important to know about. So we'll get started with the content, and Melissa will lead off.
Okay, so let us begin. Move, what, where, and that is the question. Undoubtedly, as you start thinking about the project that you're doing, be it a smaller renovation or a new branch or adding on, you've gotten some idea of what's going to happen. Is it going to be something that will take place over a weekend, perhaps, when you can leave the library open? Or do you move? Where do you move, and when do you move? That is indeed the question. The level of disruption and timing will be determined by the answers. None of us as librarians want to stop continuing our services. And so as you're considering your project and moving into it, you may want to be you'll be thinking about, how do we continue services? Perhaps to a limited degree, certainly, but how can we keep our services going, at least for people to pick up reserves and perhaps for children to come in and pick out books for homework help or for story time. And when you're thinking about this, you're also trying to determine, could our project be walled off, for instance, and contractors and electricians, whoever, work on the other side of a wall, and could we continue services? Could it be I want to say draped. And when I say drape, I don't mean drapes by drape. We know plastic off. And could that portion of the building be secured for the building, and yet you remain with your services? There's, it's really going to depend, again, on your project. If you are continuing services and have to move out of the building, some options might be going into an office or a meeting room in your city hall, if that's available. Perhaps there's an empty storefront in your downtown area or in a strip mall where you could go in. Or I've even known libraries to take a cart of books with reserve books and popular books into grocery stores several days a week. Obviously, you'd be advertising that, but that would be, how do we continue services? Do we close? How long? Do we have to? That's all something that's going to have to be determined between you and your builder, and how extensive and is your renovation or complete update. Okay. There's no really one way to continue your services. Your decision may be to close. Again, when we're looking at, do you close? Do you close for how long? Do you continue services in one branch, for instance, when you're building a new one, and close that branch down after you open the new one? Are you able to do that? And all of that will depend on talking with your contractor, your architect, and your builder to determine your timeline. How long is it going to take? Are there going to be any unnecessary periods of time when you're not going to know, for instance, if new shelving comes in time, or about delivery? Is there going to be any of that? When looking, Catherine and I talked about, do you close for half a day or more? Let's look at that. Perhaps you're waiting for inspection and approval on a particular area that you're having either renovated or new. Are there hazards that still remain? Obviously, you cannot allow the public in where there's any hazard, or any staff, really. Are there notable amounts of materials that have been brought in for your renovation that need to be removed, that again present hazards or in the way? Do staff and volunteers need special training? Do you need to close for half a day? Do you need to close for a whole day so that staff and volunteers are trained when there's a move back in? Does that need to happen? Is there of course, there's going to be a deep cleaning. What does that deep cleaning mean? Does it mean just dusting a row of shelves, or does it mean preparing a whole branch library for new furniture and collection? And then wanting to build public anticipation, the idea of closing because you're going to be offering something unique and new to your library constituents. And that will be, so there's variations. Again, like we're saying, to say, it's going to be up to you to decide how that closing is going to be, if it's going to be half a day, if it's going to be a week, if you're able to continue a limited amount of service, whatever that's going to be, you'll be, as you're working into this renovation and this building project, you'll be thinking about this all the time and looking at what you need to be considering.
So I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about moving. No matter what kind of construction project you're doing, you're going to be moving stuff around. Some of you are going to be moving more stuff than others. So really, the move is a project within a project. You have a construction project, and the moving of stuff is actually a pretty big sub-project there. So you will notice on this chart that I have 3 bullets here that you can't control: the weather. So Melissa already mentioned things like there could be delays for any reason, supply chain, or a contractor can't do some work because there's some obstacle, you know. So all I can say is you have to be flexible and adapt, that even the best plans require adjustments for unforeseen reasons. So that said, these are the kinds of things you have to think about when you're moving your stuff: your project, your size, your type, the budget, the weather, and all these other unknowns. All of this said, good planning means you're going to have a smooth move. Here are some considerations for you. It does help to have a firm construction timeline. You never know when a delay is going to occur, but the contractor is responsible for giving you as close a target as they can get, because they need to know that to run their business too. Some of you may have to find transition storage space, either inside your existing building or somewhere else, because you might need to temporarily park some collections somewhere. Well, where are you going to do it? In your meeting room? Or is there someplace outside or a temporary shed you can put it in? We are going to talk in more detail in the next few slides about planning, weeding, and how to decide if you need professional movers versus in-house. Excuse me. Anyway, Melissa and I recommend, no matter how big your library is, that you should have a planning committee. Pick a core team of people, have a representative from each library department, and you're going to get together regularly to plan, communicate, and execute this smooth move. If you are in a shared use building, like some of you may be in municipal buildings or in a school building. So I used to run a branch that was in a school. You should have somebody representing that other entity on the committee so that there's clear communications. So having a planning committee, a core team of people, somebody from every department that's go-to person, very, very essential in this work. Then weeding. Oh my gosh, we're going to really get on your case about weeding. There's no better time to do a good weeding than a building project. Worn, old, tattered materials in a new space, they ruin the look. It's not appealing at all. Now, if you haven't heard of this, there's this thing called the CREW method. CREW is an acronym for continuous review, evaluation, and weeding. It's a very concise way to do weeding if you haven't heard of it. And the manuals are readily available at no charge online. Several state libraries and agencies have them. You just Google CREW weeding method and it comes right up, okay? Now, some people push back and they go, oh, if we have a new space, we want to have as many materials as possible. But no, I feel again that especially anything that looks really worn, tattered, ugly, this is the time to get rid of it. And Melissa also has experience and a good idea and says to temporarily color code your collections, like fiction and nonfiction or whatever, because they're going to be moved around, right, Melissa? How have you done this color coding?
Well, the color coding, what we did is very often using Post-its, but also big computer signage that we used for, perhaps yellow was fiction and red was nonfiction, where it started, and being able to do that color coding so you know where you've gone through. You know what you've weeded. The other thing that we didn't talk about here, but I want to talk about, before any renovation, we always did a whole branch cleaning day. We brought staff in and paid them either on a Saturday or perhaps a Sunday afternoon. We had recycle bins and garbage bins, and they cleaned their offices, as well as, I mean, the weeding, how you remove your books is another thing, but the idea of office space, those papers that have been shoved in the corner that you haven't used forever to take a look at, but really deep clean, as well as weeding that collection. And I've talked before in these, talking about, it seems like every director has a little thing. My thing is a collection, and my idea was always that you don't want to do any change or moving without making sure that collection's clean, that it's in the best of shape. And I'll talk a little later about purchasing collection from your vendors ahead of time and having that collection stored until you might move into either an enhanced area or into a new branch. So
Yeah, I second all of those comments. So Melissa's now going to get into a little bit more about moving.
yeah, I want to talk about professional movers, and in almost every instance of my 10 moves, we have used professional movers. And do they need to be specific library movers? No, they do not. They do not. Movers move. But here's what we did. Is we brought various companies in. If you're in an area where you have a variety of moving companies, you can ask them to come in, you can ask them to submit a bid, and then with the bidding, or ask them questions about how would they pack? What would they do? Would they help you? Would they articulate in the Dewey area, for instance, do the labeling? How would they do that? How would they label? And just to get some idea of what it's going to cost, what they would do, how long it would take. Also, if they would store, if you have to remove items off-site and have it stored for a period of time, do they have storage facilities that you could lease? And then ask if there's any staff training. If they would come in, even if you hired professional movers, you may want one or two of them to come in at various times to help to show staff how to pack their own offices, for instance. Not that necessarily the staff would be moving the items they packed, but at least to let them know that they can clean out their desk, how they need to do it as far as poundage, and if that's applicable. But how much it will cost, ask for references, get a solid contract, and also with an option that if you run into problems, if you run into vendor timeline problems, if you run in because of weather, construction problems, that you're able to extend that contract. Make sure that when you work with professional movers, that you have that kind of flexibility with them, and you get that by hiring the best ones you can, by asking for references, and by talking to them ahead of time and working with them as you go along. Catherine, anything to add for the professional movers with that?
Yes. For the longest time, there was this debate, and we've already referenced it. Do you get a library-specific mover or a company that specializes in moving offices or records, or just, your neighborhood movers? And there is something to be said for companies that have expertise in moving things that have to be moved in a specific order. But here's how we ended up working around it on several of my moves. The staff would take boxes of uniform size that were provided by the moving company, and our staff and volunteers would take the materials off the shelves, put them on the boxes in order, and label them accordingly. The movers then would pick up those boxes, get them on the truck, or move them to the other room, put them in the right space, and then again, staff and volunteers would unpack, put them back on the shelves in due order. So there is a way that you can work with the mover, but when you're talking to them about it, you've got to emphasize how important it is that the collections be moved in a precise order. And again, a company that's experienced with offices or archives could also help, but your local movers can work too, as long as you have the staff involved. Was that your experience, Melissa?
It was, and the other thing that happened is our moving company had labels, precise labels. And as staff took off the collection, if we, in some cases the movers did, and in some cases the staff did it, depending on what was happening, then we would label everyone starting with a Dewey, ending with a Dewey. And then as we brought those books back in, and we had the mapping done on our shelving collection, those books, boxes of books, were placed in that area for staff or volunteers to unpack and put on the shelf.
Yeah.
So that really made it easy. And if there was any, we always had a lead staff person monitoring that to make sure that they came back in Dewey order. And, there wasn't a time that we put a collection on the shelf that we didn't have to readjust it. But
Yes.
normal, that's just normal library stuff. So I'm going to talk to now about do-it-yourself. And doing it yourself is obviously, again, going to be related to how extensive your renovation is. Is it really going to be a big major move that's going to be moving shelving and collection and all that? Or can you do it yourself? You need to think about that, write clear expectations and put them in writing so that staff know. All staff are needed, no vacations, no time off. And you need to make that clear way ahead of time so that they know that it's important for them to be there to help with this move. I did think about this, but I do know on some staffing job descriptions, there is some discussion, or there's a line item talking about how much poundage, or how staff can be allowed to lift or to push or to whatever that is. So you have to be very cognizant of that. If you've got a really small staff and a lot of stuff to do, you may have to bring in volunteers if you've got good volunteers. If you've got staff and volunteers together, they need to be trained on what the process is, working with your clear expectations, and also the safety. You have to look for your safety. We often searched for ahead of time, talked to our insurance company, looking out for liability issues. That was some of the deterrent that determined if we would do it ourselves or if we would bring in a professional moving company. Looking at those liability issues, be very, very careful, because you don't want anything to come back and say, well, you knew it was going to be this much weight or whatever it would be. So you need to research that very carefully to determine if you can do it yourself. If it's a small little project, sure, you can do it. But if it's taking it out of the building and storing it, there's that fine line, but it's been done. It certainly has been done, and there's no right or wrong to it. But I always looked for the liability pieces through the insurance company and kind of my own gut instinct, the instinct of what's the right thing to do here? What's the right thing to do for staff? And what's the right thing to do with the community? And let's do what's best for them. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. Every major project we ever did, I ended up getting tendinitis because all I was doing was repetitive motion things, either dusting or putting books back and forth on the shelf. If you're not used to doing that, you can really get some sore muscles for a while. I mean, it resolved itself. So we're not just really talking about herniated discs and lifting, but repetitive motion injuries or discomfort can be very common during moves. And it's also important to give staff frequent breaks. And we would do fun things like have a cookie or an ice cream break to make sure that everybody rested as much as they needed.
Yes, I talk about this a little later, where we worked with our Friends of the Library and other restaurants within the community to bring lunch in, to have snacks, to take really good break times, so that it wasn't this repetitive motion after repetitive motion, because this is work. I'm not going to kid you. This is hard
Yeah.
work with it. So, and now we're going to talk a little bit about staging the site. Now, this is really more for staging the site for a major renovation, also for a new branch. And it has to do with holding a pre-meeting to talk about all those involved in the staging. Looking at your schedule for your delivery of furniture, your collection, and very often with our new branches, we were purchasing collection from our vendors for over a year. As this building was being built, we were purchasing collection, and they were storing that collection, with the idea that when we brought the collection that we had before in, the new items would be brought in, and they would be labeled accordingly and placed on shelves, so that again, using the mapping, the flow and the location of the use, if you decide to use color codes, do that. Make sure you're we used a lot of Post-it notes. We used a lot of big marking pens to make sure people knew where everything was at. We used maps. We had a variety of maps printed up so that they were at the door, and they were at any place that anyone could see them, could pick up a piece of paper and know what was happening. The other thing we did is we covered the floor and carpeting, so it was protected. Very often with either we had a company that we used that brought out plastic mats. We rented the plastic mats, and when there's all that rolling, going back and forth of these big collection pieces of equipment or shelving, that protected your covering. So we staged the site. We did the best we could at trying to protect what was new, and to outline what all the new pieces that were going to go in, and have it done efficiently. Again, like I said, there was never a collection that we put in place that we didn't have to redo or reshuffle, I should say. It wasn't redo it, but reshuffle it. But at least with doing the scheduling and looking at the furniture and looking at how the flow of your room goes, of your library goes, you could really help yourself with a lot of pre-planning ahead of time. And as we went along, we thought ahead and did a dumpster, because when you break down those boxes, or if you've got any paper, any cardboard, any places, so we had a dumpster for a recycling dumpster for the boxes, as well as a dumpster for other items on the floor that might be on the floor that you would normally put in the garbage or but we pre-ordered those and had those on location at the same time. Move the technology when everything is coming in, when the shelving's coming in, you got to dust those shelves down, get those boxes out, and then start cleaning up. And that goes to what we spoke to earlier for a major cleanup. When does that happen? Does that happen after everything's in place? And yes, is the vacuuming, even the vacuuming until people are almost ready to come in the door. You're still vacuuming, but the idea of cleaning up and dusting and keeping your shelves clean and keeping your bookends and your books arranged in good order, and doing all the unpacking and removing of items.
And speaking of vacuum cleaners, you're probably going to kill at least one on your construction project. Now, Melissa had this great idea to share with all of you, and I sort of did some version of this on my projects too, but we recommend that you get several buckets, depending on the size of your project, or some kind of container, and put these kinds of supplies you see on the slide in them, from gloves to box cutters, because then you're not walking all over the library to find the scissors, or I need this all-purpose cleaner because something spilled, or you never know what's going to happen. And that's a great idea. Seriously, do have more than one vacuum cleaner, and it should be a better commercial one, or if you can rent them or borrow them from another library or agency, because there is so much dust and fluff and packaging that just gets all over the place, right, Melissa?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. So, oh, here we go. Now, through all of this, you're actually in two phases. There's the transition when all the work is being done, and then there's the wonderful adjustment that comes afterwards. So always think through, are the staff and the volunteers ready for the work in the transition and then the work that comes after the project is completed? So what do I mean by that? First of all, make sure that everybody is familiar with the building changes in how they are supposed to move about and work in the space. This is particularly critical if you're moving into a new building. It takes days to inform and train people on things like the new burglar alarms and the new computers that have been set up. And even if it's a smaller project, let's say you're adding a corner of the library, you've renovated it into a teen space, people still need to know about what's there, what's allowed to be done there, and what's not allowed. It really helps to give staff a printout, a written document of frequently asked questions, and also give them scripts, because during or especially after the project, they're going to get a lot of questions from the public. And you want to make sure that everybody is giving a consistent answer. Sometimes in construction projects, you'll get people that there's an implied criticism in their question. Things like, oh, I see you have a new bathrooms. What kind of taxpayer money was used for that? So you have to be consistent and very calm about the way that you answer these comments and questions from people. I have found on my projects that creating a bookmark about the capital project was really useful. We would have some basic facts on one side, and on the flip side, you can ask people to give a donation to keep up the quality building that you have just unveiled. Remember, too, you want to be ready after your construction project. You're likely to have more visitors. You're going to have some new visitors that are curious. You want to make sure you have sufficient staff and volunteers on board. For the larger projects, when I opened a new library, we actually had a welcome person at the door during peak hours to greet people and to orient them to the new space and point them to the general direction in which they needed to go. So that brings us to, what do you do when you open? What do you do when you're done? So you want to have your staff ready for this and have the capacity. And we're gonna cover in a little more detail the next 3 bullets, but whether you've repaired restrooms or have a whole new facility, now it's time to celebrate. And your celebration activities should be scaled to match the size and complexity of your project, but every completion is worth a cheer and a lot of promotion. One of the examples I want to give you is there was a library here in Pennsylvania, and I had worked on their strategic plan. And one of the things that they finally got done after years of needing to do it was they renovated their public restrooms. Their restrooms looked terrible. Chipped tile, things had been flooded. Well, they finally got a grant to do this. And they made a big deal out of their new bathrooms, and they had really funny publicity, and they bought extra copies of that children's book, Everyone Poops, and they had a good time with it. But even if you renovate your bathrooms, that's a big deal. So when you have this end to your project, make sure, if appropriate, that you've got the right kind of signage. It can be temporary at first, and then eventually you're going to have the more permanent signage. But let's say, for example, that you're building a new telehealth room in your branch, or again, that new teen area. Nobody knows where it is. You can use masking tape or something else to put footprints or a path to that new space that helps generate interest. Some places rent a red indoor-outdoor carpet roll from a rental place and have it outside like it's the Oscars or something. There's a big deal going on. So make sure people are able to wayfare directionally within the new space. And when it comes to marketing, think through this. When we market our libraries, reading is sort of a passive, quiet activity, and it doesn't always play well on radio or local TV stations. And I can assure you that local media are going to be very interested in your library renovation. Media know that everybody knows and loves libraries. It's the kind of thing that they want to cover. So think about what kind of sound bites can you get? Like, could it be kids singing at a story time? Could there be video snippets of kids using computers? I mention children a lot because media love pictures of children. But make sure that you get those sound bites and those good visuals because they can be used for local formal media and in social media as well. So anyway, now it's time to celebrate and think about the fact that there's what we call a soft opening, and then there's an official grand opening. The soft opening is when the building is finally open for people to come in and do what they used to do. But you want to have a more formal opening a little bit later, just in case there are delays. So for example, at the place where I built a whole new building, we had the soft opening, and then we were able to have the official grand opening with the elected officials and the donors and everyone a few weeks later when we knew for certain the library would be open. Now, I do want to share a story about a bagpiper. At this new library that we built, the day that we were first opening to the public, our dedicated users were lined up outside. They couldn't wait to be the first people in this new facility. But just as we were going to open the doors at 9 a.m., one of our staff's husbands was a Scottish bagpiper. And he dressed up in regalia. And again, it was just the staff and the volunteers inside before we opened the doors. He marched from the staff offices in a very solemn procession, all by himself, playing this bagpipe music as we went to open the doors. We all broke down in tears. We were exhausted, we were excited, and it was such a meaningful moment. It was almost better than the grand opening that we did weeks later. So celebrate those moments, but do know that you can have your soft opening when the building's sort of ready to resume service, but have something more formal down the line. Over to you, Melissa.
Yeah, I do. I want to talk about thank you for supporters, but I also would be remiss if I didn't tell you about on several occasions during the branches that we moved. Several of those branches had long histories within the community. For instance, one of them was one of the first branches within Hennepin County here in the Twin Cities. And it had been a library without running water or plumbing or when it officially opened years before. And what we did to thank our supporters for some of that is we held a goodbye. We invited the Friends of the Library, we invited our patrons, and we invited our donors into for the new space, but also into the old space. And we had some snacks and we told stories. And we said goodbye to that old space. Even the new space, even though the new space was welcome, the old space still held some memories of what had happened and the children in the community growing up. So we did do that. So, and that was also part of our thank you. We did invitations, obviously, invitations, you give thanks, you give recognition. We did signs as contractors were coming in and out of the building, and our architects and our builders, we'd say thank you. Thank you, thank you. And sometimes there's pictures here of a donor wall. Here's the signs like we had with it, and the donor wall was would acknowledge our donors. Sometimes you may choose to do that donor wall, sometimes not. Sometimes it's just a regular thank you. Sometimes it's a sign. Thank you, thank you, thank you. with what happens. We thanked our architects and our contractors, and they not only thank them, we acknowledge them. We acknowledge them in the invitation. We acknowledge them in the program that happened when we opened the library. The mayor or whoever was speaking publicly acknowledged everyone that took part in putting all of this renovation and this new things together. So that was done. And like I said,
I want to jump in and say, if you publicly and frequently thank your architects and your contractors, remember there's punch lists, and your project really isn't done at your soft opening. You know, there are several walkthroughs. You're going to discover things that aren't quite working the way they are. And the nicer you are to your contractors, the more prompt they're going to be and willing to address your punch list issues, right, Melissa?
absolutely, absolutely. For sure, for sure. And enjoy your success. I do have to say, we opened a new library. The libraries that I worked on were anywhere from 2,000 square feet to 36,000 square feet. And the day we walked in for the 36,000 square foot library and saw the child with the book, and you have to stand there and say, this is what it's all about. This, library directors, is what it's all about, making a difference in our community for our children and then for our adults, for our seniors, because enjoy it and just bask in your own success. It's been a lot of work. Take some breaks, have some fun, enjoy it. But in the bottom line of it is enjoy your success and what it means to your community. Relax, you've made a difference for the years to come. You're going to have more users, you're going to attract more traffic and attention. They're going to like all of the spaces that it's in. They're going to utilize them. And that's, again, what it's all about.
You know, I'm also going to throw in here, if you're a director or a manager, you feel very busy during the construction project, and you usually have to have extra support from the staff and volunteers at your location. And you think life's going to go back to normal after the construction project, and it doesn't. You're going to find something else to do that's going to make you almost as busy. There are so many times where we're like, how did we do this for the past few months? And then it's over and something else looms large, right, to fill that gap, Melissa. But it is really rewarding to conclude a capital project. There's no doubt about it.
And what I always liked is I thought of my staff and myself and even the board as problem solvers. Problems would come along, we would solve them. And we'd be able to move on to the next problem or whatever that was, or maybe not a problem, just another success. But the idea of congratulating yourself and your staff and your board for making this happen for the community, as well as all the new people that walked in the door. Welcome, welcome to our new space. Okay. Now we're, you know, we understand this and we explain this to you ahead of time. There's just so many nuances with this. Everything from project to project can be so different, but please, David, you have some questions that you wanted to ask us? And if any new came in as we were going along, please send them our way.
And yes, fielding a lot of appreciative words in chat for one thing, both for the content and Kathy for your lovely use of Canva and sense of humor that comes through with that. I've said so myself. Yeah, you just make it fun. Yeah, so I am going to take the liberty of going out of order with these questions. Do have a decent list, but if you are in the gallery and have not yet submitted yours, don't let that stop you. I'll submit. And this first question, Kathy, went back to I think it was you who had mentioned the script notes value of that, and preemptively having some talking points vis-a-vis a budget for those in the community who are prone to penny pinching. So that is great. Additional to that, what kind of content do you recommend being in those script notes that you arm staff with?
You know, it really depends on the project, but usually In those FAQs, we mentioned something about the budget and where the money came from. And that also honors and gives credit to the local government and or donors or the grantee. We often have an answer to the question, why was this done? Because people want to know, I thought the bathrooms looked fine. Why did you redo them? Other things like listing the architect, the contractors, and major vendors, that's very useful too. So at a minimum, those are the kinds of things that I would include.
The other thing is thanking your city administration or your county administration for making this happen. Very often when these renovations and changes appear, it's private public partnerships. Thanking them in some of your cases, obviously in Idaho, you've got the grants that came your way through the state government, but also through, there might be some private donations and some of that, and acknowledging that if people want to be acknowledged. Some don't, but
Sure.
to do that, yeah.
Okay, thank you for fleshing that. I'm going to turn now to the list of pre-submitted questions. Melissa, you had mentioned kind of that determining with your executive team based on liability and other reasons when it makes sense to have staff do the lion's share of the work and when it makes sense to bring in movers. You've had some good experiences with movers. This question is more about the project management leadership of such a project. I'll just quote it. When does it make sense to hire outside help to manage the move? And when does it make sense to do that all yourself as a library director? And I guess maybe this is the rub, the part two of that question. How can you know in advance, or it's too late?
Well, I think there's a couple things you'll know in advance. How many staff you have? Boom. I mean, how much capacity do you have? I mean, you could bring in the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, all of that kind of thing, but how much capacity? Your volunteers come in, but you always have to remember, directors, as you all know, there's always a tail. Someone manages those people. Someone has to watch out for them. So, I think as you're going in, you'll be able to determine the size of your staff. Do you have the capacity? It's really capacity. Do you have the capacity to do it within the framework of what you're doing? Are there other people to help you? Can the contractor help you? I talked a little bit about perhaps a walling off a part of a library that needed to be walled off, and on the other side they were working on washroom facilities or whatever, and you had to bring in the yard portable facilities until that was finished. So there's all of those questions that keep you up at night. I do have to say that. It's like, make sure you think of all of that. But if you have a planning committee and if you have anyone that's done any major moves, you'll be able to think about that and think about what makes sense. And then I have a hard and fast rule. I have to tell you, I learned the first time as a baby librarian, and I did it right, and I was a hero. They took down the walls and we moved that collection out, because when they started removing the walls, the ceiling fell. And so you have a ceiling falling down. If that collection would have been in there, they'd still be dusty it up or whatever. But, my hard and fast rule is if you're removing walls, you get that collection either out or into a safe place where the dust and all of the after effects of that are taken care of. Does that answer it? I hope that just kind of having a sense of making some executive decisions. You're a problem solver.
Yeah, I'd like to throw something in. I was lucky on all my building projects to have some built-in help.
Yeah.
First of all, your architect should be able to help you identify the complexity of the project and whether or not you need a project manager.
Sure.
The second point I want to make is when I was in libraries that were departments or entities connected to local government, my public works colleagues were indispensable. And in one case, and this was at the Hershey Public Library, that was the multi-million-dollar facility I helped build. The public works director was very involved. We did have the general contractor provide project management services, but he was indispensable for some of the technical stuff I couldn't handle. If you get government money from any entity at a local or county level, talk to those public works people. They will be more than happy to help you. They'll be thrilled in most cases that you asked.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
That's true.
Yeah, easy to overlook, but they're your natural allies.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay, we actually had quite a few questions about movers, but you both did a wonderful job sort of answering those in passing. So I don't think I need to even give voice to some of them. There is one last detail before we pivot to another topic, and that was about insurance, namely the insurance and other certifications that movers hold or should hold. What should you be on the lookout for if you're in a situation where you're vetting movers?
I'm going to give you an example of a library where I was an interim director. They had a lot of public artwork in that building. This is kind of skirting around it, but I'll get back to it. They had a lot of public artwork in that building that was insured. They had a separate policy on that that was insured, and all the staff knew if there was any fire in that building, what particular piece of artwork was the first one to grab because it was the most expensive. But if if you have unique things in your building that you have policies on, that's one thing. The other thing is your general, if you're part of a city government or county government, and your policies should, and you should look into them, be able to handle some of the nuances that happen. For instance, here's one. We moved into a 36,000 square foot building, and the shelving truck that was delivering our shelving backed into the garage and knocked down bricks at the where the garage was going to go for our mobile services. Okay. Luckily, and this happens, we know our vendors. Our vendors had insurance, our city had insurance. Within a month, it was fixed. But that was all taken care of ahead of time, and we knew about it ahead. Well, we didn't know this was going to happen, but we knew that we had reliable vendors coming in that would cover any problem that happened with any damage to shelving that came in that had to be returned, any of that. And also, think about this, when you start making project decisions, that your furniture comes in the building. Very often what happened, we got caught, is the mover would, or the trucking company would only move the tables to outside, and then staff or workers, construction workers, had to get the tables in the building. That was a lesson learned. So we always looked at how does that work? How is our professional contractors, is there insurance for that? How's the coverage? Is our city covered? Is our staff covered? Is our volunteers covered? That's all things you can do way ahead of time. And like Catherine says, if you're working within an entity where within a county or a city, you're going to have people there that'll help you with that. Does that answer your question? I hope.
Yeah, and most of the time when the movers are giving you an estimate or a quote, you have the right to ask them, could we please see your proof of insurance and what is covered? And you can always ask for something extra like the paintings or the valuable teacup collection that someone donated to the library or whatever. But yeah, there is insurance involved, just like there is for the contractors working on your building.
Yes, for sure.
I don't know about teacups, but does bring to mind there's a library here in Minnesota that has a bona fide fossil collection funded by and they do have insurance rider for that in
yes.
Very good. So this next question submitted a couple minutes ago was with respect to localized moves. I think what they mean by that is moves where you're renovating one particular part of the library, say the children's zone or the teens area, and ostensibly the rest of the footprint of your library is untouched, but obviously the stuff has to go somewhere. And, there are contractors and so forth coming in and out. What advice, be it general or specific, do you have for a library project manager who's contending with that kind of project where the doors are still open, hours of operation are still what they always are?
In my case, we utilized many of our libraries were in conjunction with city halls, and we were able to utilize some space in City Hall, either for storage or whatever. And the other one, it was a standalone building, and we put things in a meeting room, and the meeting room wasn't used. It was a small meeting room, but items fit in there, collection items in small boxes fit in there, or we put them on book carts. We weren't afraid to borrow and beg for some book carts from other libraries in the area if they had any extras to use. Rent a truck and go get those. But we were able to move the collection out of the way of where the renovation was and keep it right there. Now it's messy, but you have to keep it tidy and keep it going and make it very clear that people aren't back there rumbling around open boxes for books.
Yeah.
Clear that way kind of thing, but it's possible. If there's a local garage, or if there's a room, if there's a meeting room. What do you think, Catherine?
Yeah, same thing. We use the meeting rooms. We had people stash some things in their staff offices. And of course, remember what we told you earlier, clean everything before the project so you have the less to store elsewhere. Also, there are these things now that you can rent. They're called pods, rented pods. And some of them are watertight. And they're right there on the location of the library, so you can shove boxes in there. Think twice about moving things to storage units. They're costly. And there's the move there and the move back. Now, sometimes you have to do it. Like Melissa said, maybe you'll stash your stuff in an empty room at the city hall or the county courthouse, but try to avoid that depending on the size of the things you need to store. An on-site waterproof pod is more labor efficient than going off-site and back again.
Yeah. We didn't have those pods, but you see them all over now.
Yeah.
When I was doing a lot of those moves.
Particularly
Good.
in summertime when everybody's itching to move homes.
Yeah.
Very good. So we have a couple more minutes left, and I think the perfect question to fill these last 2 minutes. And that was concerning weeding. In the case of a library, and I think this is going to be true for many, if not most, of those watching us today. So you're in an org chart where there is no person who's devoted to collection development. There's no collection development person, no full-time cataloger, and it's not necessarily within the director's purview. When it comes to weeding, be it in prep for a move or just routine weeding, do you have any advice for who should play point?
Well, I have to go back to if your collection is important to you, you figure this out. That's one thing. The other thing is we've had depending if you're in a union environment or not, we've been able to utilize volunteers in some of those by using the guidelines from CREW. And I've always made every staff member is in charge of this collection. So when this collection walks in the door, it's open to see if there's a piece of cheese being used for a bookmark, or if there's writing in it, or if it's damaged. Everyone is in charge of the collection. The idea that there needs to be one person, I think, is silly. Even for big libraries, people need to be aware of what's in that collection. We've used volunteers. We've trained volunteers on how to do the weeding. We've trained shelvers on how to do the weeding. The weeding, they could be putting it on a cart, and at least a professional would be reviewing it. To keep or to order a new one or whatever that is. But anybody can do this weeding. That's obviously in the library that you have volunteers and trained to do it. Catherine, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it should be an ongoing organic thing. And I can actually share my screen here. This is a page from the CREW manual that is on the Texas State Library site. So there's some librarians, oh my gosh, a volunteer weed? Never. Well, sure, they can do it. You can tell your pages or your volunteer shelvers, hey, Anytime you see something that looks worn out, ragged, and you wouldn't want to take it home, stick it on a cart and let one of us make a decision. We'll probably pull it. Outdated and obsolete information. I've been in libraries that still have children's science books that are so old that man hasn't landed on the moon yet.
Right.
And that's pretty awful. I mean, this has happened, okay? Trivial subject matter. It might be something about the history of pet rocks. You know, that was a big fad back like in the 70s, right, Melissa?
Yeah.
No, so quick and easy weeding can be done by anybody. You don't have to have an MLS to do this. Yeah, no way.
The other thing I want to talk about with some of this, very often your community gets concerned if they see you weeding. And part of your ability as a director is to talk to your board to help them understand that you are not in I mean, your libraries anymore, and particularly any of them, are not storage facilities. We don't store these things. We have large libraries that may have retro collections, but we're, for the most part, popular libraries with good current information on healthcare, good current information on geography, on what's going on in the nonfiction areas. That's our pride. That's how our community learns. So help your board understand that. And then, you know, you may have to put the weeding at the bottom of the dumpster so there's no dumpster diving, or give it to the friends if it's in fairly good shape and not that old. Personally, and I probably shouldn't admit this, on any paperbacks that were damaged above, I'd rip off the front cover.
Yeah, and it's funny, I had this issue at Hershey that one of the
Yeah.
elected officials saw the books that we were reading and raised this in a public meeting, and then I returned to the next meeting and gave them a primer on weeding and talked about the cheese bookmarks. And well, one time we also found $100 bill in all of this, but they got a good education on weeding. You should have a collection development policy that talks
Yes.
about this too. But there are some people that get very sensitive about weeding, and it's best to do it discreetly. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope that helps.
Yes,
Good.
yes. So we have opinions on weeding as I mean, that could be a webinar unto itself. Sounds like Kathy got halfway there just in talking to that government body. It occurs to me that I can, and perhaps we should, share a link to the crew instructions in the email that, of course, you all get from us after these webinars. It will also include the replay link if you want to revisit some section or share it with a colleague, and a survey which we'd greatly appreciate if you could take 2-3 minutes for. But with that, we are at time. So just on behalf of everybody, there's some thank yous in the chat. So I'll just collect them all and say thank you, Kathy and Melissa. Some of us will see you in Boise for the directors pre-conference next week. And for everyone else, we will see you for our April webinar, our first of two that will deep dive into some case studies that our consultants are familiar with. So the greatest hits will revisit all the topics we've covered to date through the lens of real life scenarios. So I think it'll be very instructive. Thank you all again. Have a great rest of your day.
Good. Bye, folks. Happy weeding.
Yes, yes.